Welcome everyone. Myself Dr. Praveen Kumar Pathak. I'm working as an associate professor in the Department of Geography at Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi, along with my colleague Ms. Manisha Sharma. So today we are going to talk about issues which is very pertinent in the contemporary time, which is climate change, disasters and migration interlinkages. So as we all know, that global environmental challenges have occupied very significant concern in policies and development perspective. So basically what is happening that with improvement in human circumstances, improvement in standard of living of people, we are actually entering into an era of Anthropocene, wherein human exploitation of natural resources, for example, agriculture, for industries, for human settlement, has taken in such an extent that we are actually threatening the planetary boundaries. And so therefore there is a huge stress on natural and planetary resources. So because of these massive exploitation of natural resources by human beings for meeting their different requirements related to food, shelter and prosperity, the implications are now being felt in forms of various global environmental change crises. For instance, we all are these days concerned about climate change and its possible implications. We know that climate change, which actually refers to changes in the climatic condition over a large period of time, is happening particularly in the post-industrialization era. So with industrialization coming in, there is a massive exploitation of natural resources. So we are continuously modifying the land use and land cover patterns globally. So as an effect of these important changes, what is happening? We are exploiting mountains. We are converting green flora and fauna, and we are actually exploiting biodiversity. Many flora and fauna are now at the verge of extinction. We also see the problem of cyclones becoming more frequent, extreme weather conditions becoming more common, and the episodes of disasters, whether floods, whether they are drought, even heat waves have become very common and very frequent. So all of these, which may be considered as global environmental changes, are putting tremendous influence on natural systems and human systems. And so the effect of these important changes is that people who are living on the margins are finding it very difficult to survive. So our collective effort to strive for sustainability has been entrenched, and we are finding very difficult to address the basic requirement of human population, whether it's reducing the burden of poverty, whether it's providing quality education, whether it is providing good quality of health to the people, whether it is providing livelihood opportunities, and finally, because of the increasing frequencies, intensities of these extreme weathers and disasters, human population is actually forced to move to different places, and some people choose to move because they are not able to survive in their native places because of the implication of climate change driven implications, and some people who are even not they don't have enough capital to make this decision to go outside, and hence they have no choice but to live where they are originally living. So in this way, with this background, I would like to discuss today the important interlinkages between global environmental changes, disasters and human migration. So we all know that climate change poses very unprecedented threat to the human society. One of the important facets is the global warming. Global warming, which has contributed more severe and frequent extreme events, weather events globally. For instance, if you look at the episodes of heat waves, What is heat wave? So basically when this temperature crosses the normal threshold, so for example more than 40 degrees centigrade during summers, so spells of heat waves are now being felt not only equatorial region, also observe that several temperate region countries, for example last year in Europe, we observed that during the summers the temperature were as high as 40 degrees centigrade. So these frequent spells of heat waves is making huge toll on the health of people, on their productivity, on day-to-day activity. It also has a huge implication on agriculture and food security. So with increasing frequencies of heat waves, there is also tremendous stress on ecosystem services. The demand for energy resources is skyrocketing. When heat wave spells are observed in different part of the world, whether it is demand of electricity for running air conditioner, for pumping more water, for irrigating fields, so there is huge stress, and the stress compounds several times during these heat waves time. Similarly, the episodes of droughts have also become very frequent, and because of global warming, what we are observing that the rainfall pattern has become more erratic. So the length of the rainy season has considerably reduced. On the other hand, we find that episodes of too much rainfall, the amount of rainfall in few smaller span of time is actually increasing. We also find these episodes of cloud burst, which many times lead to flash floods. So on the one side, we are grappling with drought in different part of the world, and the frequency and the intensity of the drought is increasing day by day. And on the other hand, there are many pockets of the world where floods are also increasing. So with these heat waves, episodes of heat waves, drought, floods increasing, and we also know that in coastal areas, storms and cyclones have also become very regular phenomena. So these are some of the important global environmental changes which have been recorded, and their frequency has been increasing in the recent times, and they are pushing a lot of stress on human systems. So if you look at these disasters, whether they are floods, whether they are droughts, whether they are cyclones, so all such kinds of disasters actually reverse the decades of development progress that human society has made. So if you recall, the 1999 cyclone which hit the coast of Odisha in India, or if you recall the earthquake of Bhuj in 2001, the tsunami which hit the South Asia in 2004, and the recent floods in the South Asia and Pakistan, and several other places, the recent flood also in Germany. All these episodes which actually are not very welcome, so create a lot of havoc for human life and property, can actually undo decades of development work. And given that the frequencies of these episodes occurring more frequently in the global south, the prospect of continuing the process of development is impeded due to episodes of global environmental changes, including disasters. So therefore, we have seen wider impacts of the recurring disasters and various environmental crises has tremendous bearing on the health outcomes or health security of people. So for example, we have seen that large proportion of people, those who are living in the global south, are grappling with infectious diseases. So part of the reason is the contamination of water. So there is the problem of availability of water and the quality of water. And particularly if you look at young children and infants, we observe that why there is a higher incidence of infant and child deaths in global south. Part of the reason is the contamination of water and sanitation problem here. So when you have scarcity of water and people have to walk to a largest distance to fetch water, or there is a depleting groundwater resources, there will be an impact on general population. Even there is the huge toll on the health of adult people and elderly people. On the same time, as heat waves episodes are increasing, they also has tremendous impact on the productivity and health status of population. We also find evidence to suggest that when these disasters and environmental crises come, they actually bring down the livelihood options of people and therefore put them into the trap of poverty. The income and livelihood resources are heavily stressed. So on the one side we have poor health outcomes. We also observe that economic and livelihood options are also reduced due to recurring disasters and global environmental crisis. This all leads to a situation of food scarcity, because when you have recurring disasters and environmental stress, the quality of the soil, that also deteriorates. There is scarcity of water. So when you don't have enough, fertile soil, there is a scarcity of water for irrigation. So the net effect and the health of the people is not well. So in combination of these factors makes a recipe of a situation where we have food security. So what is food insecurity? So what is insecurity of food means that people do not have access to food 24/7, the quality of food they look for. So there is the issue of availability, affordability and acceptability. So all these problems means that overall development level of people is compromised, and therefore overall human security is put under huge stress. So there is a direct connection between increasing global environmental crisis, various disasters, extreme weather events. All these changes have resulted into huge stress on quality of human life and human survival. So, if you look at, the basic data sources which are available for us to understand human migration. So we have also discussed in previous lectures that essentially these are administrative records which are available with different countries, during visas, permits and border records. Second is of course the important sources of data is the census, which asks different questions on the basis of which we can quantify the volume of people, how many people are moving and also the motivation for movement. And finally the surveys also provide a very significant information, detailed information. Census has only few questions, but if you have topical surveys specifically designed to measure the magnitude and the factors which are associated with migration, then surveys are very useful. So these sort of data which are available in few countries allows them to measure the extent of human movements internally and also from one country to the other country. But if you look at SDG, and SDG has one important indicator where we try to measure, the human migration has to be safe, secure and with dignity. So what is happening that countries who do not have these robust data systems, it becomes very difficult for them to take appropriate measures in order to ensure that human migration takes place with dignified manner. Now there is a recent report from the World Bank called the Groundswell Report that tries to quantify the volume of migration globally. And they have come out with this number of 216 million people who have actually been moving out because of these global environmental changes. And majority of these global environmental changes effects is actually being seen in the global south, basically in South Asia, East Asia and Africa. So large proportion of humanity that happens to be occupying these areas, land masses, are exposed to disproportionate stress of global environmental crisis. And if you look at the recent estimates by the disaster report published recently in 2011 shows that more than 31 million people have been displaced by disasters, and large proportion of them, actually more than 80% of these disaster related human migration is related to weather related events, and only 12% or 15% are related to geophysical disasters. So whether it is floods or whether it is storms or whether it is cyclones, which actually are very sudden and they have a tremendous impact on the life and the security of people. And therefore we need to have policies which ensure that there are already steps in place in order to make sure before these disasters struck we have some plans of action to make sure that the impact of these disasters may be mitigated. If the disaster struck and people who suffer from these disasters, we also need to have arrangement in place to make sure that the relief and rehabilitation of people affected from these natural disasters is properly taken care of. Now there is a studies and data which is available for the last 10 years from 2008 to 2018, which actually looks at disaster related human migration and displacements. And it's very important to see here that if you look at the absolute numbers of disasters, different types of disasters being reported at the global level, is roughly it was about 1600 in the year 2008, and over time this has come down to around roughly 800 recently in 2018. So on the one hand, if you look at overall disasters number, the scenario seems to be it's decreasing. But if you look at even with these decreasing number, the net effect on displacement, the number of people who are being displaced. So in 2008, this number was as low as 5 million people who were displaced due to disaster, and the recent data from 2080 shows that roughly 40 million people have been made to move out from their native places to some other places because of disaster and episodes. So the point is that even if these numbers of disasters varies from year to year, but there is a very secular trend in terms of number of people who have been affected, and it's very important to know from where this number is coming. So largely this number is coming from Asia and Africa. So basically people who are living in South Asia and those who are also living in Africa, they have been disproportionately affected by the episodes of these disasters. And if you break this number down by different regions of the world, then you can clearly see that of all the displacement that happened globally in recent 2018, more than 52% was actually observed in East Asia and Pacific region, followed by 26% of these displacement due to disaster which was observed in South Asia. So these two regions account for more than 75% of disasters induced displacement in the global world. So now if you look at category wise which is most hazardous, so it's largely the incidence of floods and storms, which caters to more than 80% of the disaster related displacement. And so therefore we also see that weather related event and their impact is more disastrous, and so therefore the effect is that there is a huge toll on the life and property of people, and this is also related to huge human migration or displacement from one place to the other place. On the other hand, if you look at for example drought, if you look at other disaster, their implication on human displacement is relatively less. If you look at recent data, it has been found that more than 40% of the global population, which is roughly 3.5 billion people, today are living in geographies or places which are highly vulnerable to the climate change impacts. So these 3.5 billion people are citizens of global south, particularly living in South Asia and the sub-Saharan Africa. And mind you that the exposure to these vulnerable places to climate change is also precipitated with equally higher incidence of poverty, poor health, lack of human capital resources, social capital resources. So there is a compounding effect of environmental crisis laid upon economic, social and demographic crisis. These are also the reasons, mind you my dear friends, that also record high burden of infant and child mortality. This is also a reason where we have disproportionately higher burden of maternal deaths. This is also a region where we observe that food insecurity are high. This is also a reason where job insecurity, livelihood insecurity is a key issue. And in several of these places we also observe that there is a huge political and civil unrest in some of these regions. So the point is that this is a region where we already have a range of economic, social and political insecurities, and these are further aggravated due to the episodes of disaster which are actually influenced by global environmental changes. And so therefore there is a growing concern among policymakers, academicians, researchers and civil society that climate change and increasing disaster risk will lead to a mass human migration or mass human displacement. Now, there is a lot of debate and discussion, and science is looking to answer these questions. That migration is not an outcome of a single factor. Nobody can predict that somebody moved just because of one factor. So the science says that there is a plethora or range of factors. So it's a complex decision. This is a multi-causal decision wherein host of factors influence a decision of individual or community when they decide to move. But with all these economic, social and political issues in place, they are further aggravated with environmental stress due to climate change and global environmental crisis. So why people decide to migrate if there is a concern driven through climate change and disaster risk? So one is that climate change actually compounds or multiplies the effect on agriculture. So what is happening here? So when this climate change and crisis is happening, agriculture productivity is going down, water security is going down, infrastructure is going down, and thus people find very difficult to survive and hence decide to move out.